first thing I'd like to do, just so I can get it on tape, is just to get your first and last name.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, if you can give me that.
Okay. My name is Junkoh Harui.
And your family has been here for many, many years.
Well, my father arrived in the United States in 1908.
So he was Issei.
He was an Issei, yes. Yes.
What was your father's name?
Zenhichi Harui. Mm-hmm.
Do you know how come he ended up on? Did he come to Bainbridge first, or did he travel around before he?
Well, he arrived actually by ship in San Francisco, but his brother had preceded him to Bainbridge Island, and the reason there was quite a contingent of Japanese citizens on Bainbridge was because of the Port Blakely Mill, which hired a lot of the Japanese people. In fact, there was such a contingent there that they actually built 2 small villages on the Port Blakely Mill property.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's one small village called Yama, because Yama means hill. Yeah. And it kind of escapes me what the other village. But anyway, what they built there were a little sundry stores and a bathhouse and some other little sundry places for the citizens of Japanese ancestry. Mm-hmm.
Did they design it with Japanese type architecture or just Western?
No, they just took what was left over from the lumber mills. They're basically shacks, but they did the job. Mm-hmm.
So your father then came here in the early 1900s, and did he?
He worked at the mill for a short period of time. He and his brother worked at the mill for a very short period of time. Became disenchanted with the working conditions and the wages, so they started a small farm on New Brooklyn Road, which is only about a couple miles from here. Mm-hmm.
So was that the beginning of when you say a farm, was it
It was an actual farm, yes. They raised, their principal money crop was a blackberry called the Olympic berry, and but they raised vegetables and produce for sale.
Would they have to?
They took it to the Pike Street Market, yes.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
So did they sell it to somebody to sell it, or did they go in?
No, they went in themselves. It was a arduous thing. They would get up very early in the morning and work till late at night and sell their wares. Yeah, I don't think they did it for very long though, because they progressed well with other ventures, and they didn't need to go into sell their produce anymore.
Boy, just getting there and back takes half a day back then.
In those days, yes, it did. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah.
So when did he? You said he had other adventures business adventures ventures that did better.
Yes. They started the grocery store, and that kept them busy. And then they branched into a greenhouse operation and a nursery operation, as well as a produce operation. So they made they raised cut flowers and seasonal plants and vegetables. So it sustained them for a longer period of time than just going to the produce market.
Mm-hmm. The grocery store was the one we saw on the
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Which was out on
Miller Road. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you said he didn't marry until he was a little bit older.
That's right. Yeah.
So at this point, is he still the bachelor out there building, or had your mom come along by this point?
Well, he was a bachelor, yes, at the time, yes, and then I think it was 1925 that he got married. So he was 14. Well, he was almost 40 when he got married. Yeah.
Now, he couldn't own the land, right?
No, that's correct, yes.
So who did he rent or?
Well, they had put it in the name of a young Japanese American who, it was a she, and she placed it in her name because obviously she was born in the United States, so she's a United States citizen. Mm-hmm.
So when your father started there, it was raw land with timber.
That's correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
Boy, I just admire somebody like that who could come, and a lot of people at that time did that, but...
Well, it wasn't exclusive to Japanese. I mean, there's Norwegians and Swedes and a lot of not Scandinavians, but Yugoslavians. You know, they made up a great part of the community because they were fishermen, and that was another industry that was very popular in those days, and most of them at that time were doing well because they owned their own boats, etc. But as you know, in the last few years, fishing has not been very good economically. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like your father must have been pretty well known in the area. I mean, these beautiful flowers the nursery developed, a store he had running out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was. Yeah, it was a very popular organization. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, did people call the store by a name? Do you know, or I mean, in town we had Raiders store when we were kids.
Well, no, they called it Bainbridge Gardens. Yeah. They communication was a little difficult in those days because you not only talk to the Asian people, but you talk to Swedes and Norwegians, and it must have been kind of a fun thing to communicate with. But see, they seemed to get along and understand each other, so it worked out. Yeah.
I envisioned this store where they, you didn't always have to pay in cash, but your dad ran a tab for people. And
that happens, yes. Yeah.
What are your first memories of Bainbridge? Because you were born here on the island, right?
That's right, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, in what year? I don't mean to be so rude to ask age, but what year?
Well, I was born in 1933. I was born pretty much in the height of the Depression. And, of course, when you're young, you don't really remember too much of what happened, but I barely remember what happened. Well, in fact, I wasn't even aware of Pearl Harbor until several years after it happened, because I was sheltered by that type of news. So, in fact, when I went to school one day at Pleasant Beach, which is, a few miles away from our home, that's where we went to school, I was surprised because I was taken out of the classroom and I thought I had done something wrong. But it was just our departure time, our forced departure time.
So how old were you then? What grade?
I was 11 years old. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So your parents, I assume that's who was sheltering you, your parents from the news of Pearl Harbor and...
Yeah, excuse me, I was 9 years old, not 11 years old.
Oh, 9 years old?
Yeah. But anyway, the parents did shelter us, so I wasn't fully aware of what's happening. And it must have been a horrendous thing for them, to be forced to move. Yeah.
That seems like, again, you were a child, so you hadn't seen anything different to that point, but here your father and your mother are here, they've worked so hard, and then they come in, they say, well, we're taking away your citizenship, and...
Well, they didn't have citizenship.
Well, that's right, because they were East Side, but we're taking away
your rights.
You're going to have to leave, and...
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you were at school, and the day that you...
That's right.
The evacuation day?
That's right, yeah.
What was that like as a child? Scary?
Well, no, actually, I have very few bad memories about that era. In fact, I think when you put yourself into the age of 9 or 11 or whatever it may be, your basic, and you had responsible parents. The parents screened or sheltered you from all the bad things. They absorbed all them themselves. And so I wasn't really aware of even what happened. I mean, I wasn't aware that we were being forced away. You know, in those days when you're that age, you kind of more or less wonder what you're going to do today and what are you going to eat. You know, and it's not, you're not aware of the political situations or any adverse things, basically, because responsible parents sheltered you. So I have no memories or experiences that were real negative.
How many children were in your parents' family? How many?
5, including myself. Yeah.
And where do you fit in the?
I'm second from the youngest.
Second from the youngest. Okay, so you had olders that
That's
may have
right.
understood, perceived it differently.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you remember? So when you were taken out of class, did your parents come and get you, or did you?
I don't remember.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember going down to the dock and leaving?
Well, okay, I have another story there.
Oh, that's right, because you.
Yeah, I never went to camp.
Ah, that's right.
Yeah. The government decreed that those who lived east of the Cascade Range did not have to go to camp because it was a non-military vital area. Most of the vital areas were all west of the Cascade Range. You know, the airports and the manufacturing, shipbuilding, etc., were all on the west coast. So, for instance, those people who lived in Spokane didn't have to go to camp. So what happened was somebody found out about that and said, well, let's move to Moses Lake. So 3 families from Bainbridge Island moved to Moses Lake prior to the date that was scheduled for evacuation to the camps. And we missed it by 2 days. We left 2 days before they did. Mm-hmm.
So 2 days before the evacuation.
That's right, yeah.
So you missed.
Yeah.
So what, the store and the nursery and the garden and what happened to all that?
Well, fortunately, the store was leased to some very responsible people. Grocery store was. And so that, they paid the rent, so we were able to pay the taxes to prevent somebody taking the property away. It was a very fortunate thing because a lot of the citizens did lose their property also because they weren't able to keep up with the taxes. The unfortunate part was the garden part, the nursery and the growing operations were leased to some very irresponsible people, and most of it was destroyed through neglect or through pilferage or whatever happened. So they basically came back to total devastation as far as the nursery and greenhouse operation is concerned. Yeah.
How long was your family gone from the island, or when did you come back to the island? I guess how long were you
Well,
gone?
42 to 46, yeah.
So 4 years.
4 years, yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember, did you come back with your parents?
Oh, yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
So do you remember what that was like coming back? Because it sounds like, seeing the pictures, here was this beautiful nursery your father and family built, and now coming back 4 years later.
Mm-hmm. Well, frankly, I don't remember much of it. Again, I think we were sheltered. Let's see, I would have been 11 years old by then when let's see, it was 46, I'd be 13 years, I was 13 years old when I get back, yeah. So, I was still rather naive of what happened.
What did your parents do in Moses Lake?
Well, we farmed. We farmed. We raised. We did reasonably well because in those days it was food of any sort was necessary for not only for the domestic forces but for the armed forces, and so there was always a need for food. So we raised onions and potatoes.
On somebody else's land, or did you go?
No, well, I can't tell you whether this land was leased or purchased, but I assume it was purchased, but I'm not sure. But we farmed it.
But yeah, so you weren't working for somebody.
No.
It was.
No, it wasn't a sharecrop or anything like that. No.
Was it just your family, or because you said
there were several families? Yeah.
so you all?
Yeah, there were actually 3 families to begin with. Our family, our uncle's family, and our cousin's family. And then later on, 3 more families came.
Now, so you were, a child.
Mm-hmm.
Did you go to school then in Moses Lake?
Yes, I did.
Oh, so in your world, it sounds like your life, your parents tried to keep, quote, normal.
Yeah, somewhat.
Somewhat?
Yeah.
Do you remember going to school over there?
Oh, sure.
What that was like?
Sure. I had very traumatic experiences in the school in Moses Lake when I first got there. There was a kid that was 2 grades older than I was, and he beat the hell out of me every day. And it wasn't pleasant. But fortunately, it stopped after a couple of weeks because one of the teachers got wind of it and put a stop to it.
Was that a Caucasian
Yes.
kid? So discriminatory, or just picking on you because he was a brat? Or
yeah, well, I'm not sure what his reason was, but it wasn't pleasant.
But then when the teacher got wind of it, that... Mm-hmm. So were there many Japanese families over there in Moses Lake, or?
Well, no, there wasn't any before we got there. Yeah. In fact, when we arrived, well, of course, people are concerned about what they don't know, and so I think they had false impressions about what kind of people we were. Were we sneaky and backstabbing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we did not go there with very positive response from the community. So it took about a half a year or so for us to melt the people down, and they discovered that we are good citizens and that we work hard, and there's nothing to fear. But we were still monitored even when we were over there. We had a gentleman that checked on us every month to monitor us to make sure we didn't have rifles or cameras or radios or that type of thing. We weren't permitted to have those things.
So he would come out to the
That's right.
house?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you remember that actually?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Fortunately, he was a heck of a nice guy, and actually, he had no reason to really fear us anyway. Or he would say, "You don't have these things, do you?" And he'd laugh, which we didn't have. We had no money to buy them anyway, so it was not a caustic situation.
What was your mom like?
What was my mom like?
Yeah.
In relations to what?
Was she a disciplinarian, a stern mom, or a fun mom?
Of course. Well, she was all of those things. I hardly spoke to my dad. He was always working. And this relationship existed not only for Japanese people. I think in those days, the word of the man, the head of the house was, something that you respected, and this is the way our relationship with, as far as my father and I was concerned, that was our relationship. He didn't have that much time for me, and I don't blame him. He was too busy working, but my mother was the one that taught me all manners and discipline and most of the good virtues that you need to be a good citizen. And so she was the one that worked very hard. She fed me, clothed me, and taught me a great many things. And I owe a great debt of gratitude for her. But there was a lot of mothers like that. I mean, in those days it was, she wasn't alone as far as being able to teach us proper things to do.
Did you work the fields with your dad?
Oh, yes.
Son?
Yes, I did.
You did, so.
Yeah, we had indigent workers that came during harvest time, and some of them were a little bit on the lazy side. So my dad and my uncle would say, "Hey, get out there." Here I was, 10, 11 years old. And I had to outwork them just to show them up. And so I remember those days. It was hard work for an 11-year-old kid.
And that's it. Your dad expected you to set an example.
That's right. That's right.
Be above. My mind's drawing a blank now. I had a question there. Oh, at home, did your mother and father bilingual?
No. Well, no. They were. They could speak a little pidgin English, but it's amazing. They seem to they ran a rather successful operation, despite the fact they couldn't speak very good English. But as I said, they weren't alone. I mean, there was the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Yugoslavians and whatever, Italians and Germans. They all spoke their language, and they were pioneers to the United States, and they seemed to manage. Yeah.
That's where it gets interesting, because that is true. I mean, there were all these different cultures out there. First generation, a lot of them spoke their native tongue. The kids then became, and did you end up being some of this, a go-between for them?
Oh, yeah. For a while there, when my brother departed, I had to do all the conversations over the telephone, and I did most of the bookkeeping because I was the only one that could read. I remember I used to have to order all the seeds from the seed catalog when I was 11 or 12 years old. And then I did the income tax, even at that age.
Wow. So your dad would do a lot of the business part of things with the store and getting things out, and then you had to pick up.
Yeah, well, he couldn't read. He could read a little bit, but couldn't comprehend what he was reading.
I've heard, I can't remember who I spoke to today, but they talked about Bainbridge Island being unique and special in relation to the evacuation and the fact that...
In relation to the evacuation? Oh, yeah. Well, that's kind of easy to explain. It's an isolated area, and I think they were able to capture the group as a group, you know. I mean, it would be hard, for instance, to go out to swim or someplace and do the same thing that they did here, because well, for one thing, it'd be utter chaos trying to get those people together. But this was a situation where there was a lot of Japanese Americans, 227 as a matter of fact, that were evacuated, plus us who found other places to go to. But they were, I guess you can say, I can agree that yes, it was special. Not particularly in a positive way, but it was special, yeah.
Did you ever, was there a point in your life where you were old enough to be able to have conversations with your parents about what happened, to know their views?
Well, as a matter of fact, I did that with my brother just a few weeks ago. And because my dad and mom never talked about it. Yeah, in fact, my older brother, who lives in Seattle, I asked him how all of us drove to Moses Lake in the front of a one-ton truck. And I couldn't understand how, you know, well, there's my mom and dad and three brothers. My oldest brother and sister were in Japan during the war. So there was 5 of us that would have to ride in the front of a truck, you know, in the front cab of a truck, and drive. Of course, in those days, it must have took 4 or 5 hours all the way over there in a truck. And I asked him if he remembers that, and he says, "No, I don't remember." So I assume that he went with somebody else. I am going to take advantage of your water.
Sure. So what, did you say a brother and sister were in Japan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did they go for school?
Yep.
Now, how come you didn't go to school? Were you not old enough? Was there a certain age that?
Well, the reasoning behind going to these schools is very simple. The philosophy of those Japanese citizens that came to the United States was, well, I'm sure you've heard the story, go west, young man, go west, right? Well, in this case, the Japanese citizens, it was go east, young man, go east. They were thinking about, they had heard about this wonderful country called America, and where there's lots of riches and opportunity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So their idea was to come to the United States, seek their fortune and make their fortune, and go back to Japan and live like kings. So in preparation of that, they sent my oldest brother and sister to Japan to get a Japanese education so they would be prepared to live there. Okay? Well, unfortunately, what happened was they got stuck over there during the war. And we had no communication with them for about 5 years to know whether they were alive or dead during that war period. Well, fortunately, it worked out that they had stayed with some relatives, but it wasn't an easy life. My sister refused to talk about it. Yeah, it was a difficult time.
What part of Japan were they in?
My brother was in Tokyo, and my sister was on the outskirts of Tokyo. Yeah.
Wow, boy, the devastation that.
Well, they had very little to eat. I remember talking to some people who lived in Japan during the war, and today they wouldn't even look at a sweet potato because that's all they ate every day, every meal, sweet potato. That's all there was.
That's where the history that's taught in schools today forget to show both sides oftentimes. You know, they talk about, America coming out of the Depression and we went into war and how tough it was. but they never give the perspective of, I shouldn't say never, but often never give the perspective of other countries.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. Here was Japan facing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Japanese soldiers fighting for what they thought was right.
Mm-hmm.
German soldiers, Germany coming out of the same thing.
That's right.
Fighting for what they thought was right. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, again, we're taught one viewpoint on it and forget that there are other people.
That's right.
So 5 years your family had no contact with you. Boy. I just, again, the parents sheltered you, but for your mom and dad, that just had to be, all of this had to be so hard on their generation.
Oh, of course it was. Mm-hmm.
So when your dad came back to the island after the war, I guess it was different because everybody else, a lot of people that went to camp, there was a certain point where they said, okay, camp's done. They started being able to go out and do jobs, but there was a certain point where they shut camps down and you went back. Did your parents decide to come back when the war ended, or did they wait a while? Or?
Well, I can't honestly tell you what the decision was. I think people told me that we were late in coming back. A lot of the people had moved back earlier, but I can't name you dates or times when that happened, as far as when they departed camp to come back to Bainbridge. I think only about 25% of the people came back, because most of them were strawberry farmers, and it wasn't a great living. And they were branched into other opportunities. A great many people of Japanese ancestry moved to Chicago, even during the war, because of this degree. You could leave the camp with permission, but you couldn't move to the West Coast. You could move to other areas, and a great many people went to Chicago, and they were able to find lots of work there. Of course, during the war, work was plentiful. Everybody was looking for help. So they had great opportunities. If there's any way of rationalizing the good of camp life, or what the decision of 906, Executive Order 9066 is, it may have gotten them off the farm and got them into different ventures. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but at least it got them off the farm, and sometimes the farm life was very meager. And I'm not justifying Executive Order 9066 either.
You used how to rationalize, if you can, which is so difficult, because when you look back now, 60 years, in your mind, when you think about what happened, what are the feelings that you have today about what happened?
Oh, well, it was absolutely wrong, totally wrong. It was a decision made just basically by ethnic identity, and that's why we as a community, Japanese American community, worked so hard in letting people know that it was wrong. We're not going to let it go silent, because it almost happened again, or it has happened again, in the Iranian situation. People of Iranian or Muslim descent were openly persecuted, and it wasn't their fault. They're probably decent, outstanding citizens, but yet they have the identity crisis, and so it's totally wrong. What happened was totally wrong. So we're making it a very big point to correct that if possible, and so there's no time for embitterment. There's time for reflection, and for learning, and I think we've done that. We're a proud group of people, and we work hard, and and most of us are honest, and I think we've proved to the world that we're decent citizens, and so I'm very proud of that too.
Do you think that it was being left out of history?
Of course it was. Of course it was. I talked to many people who are in the age of 40s and younger. They don't even know anything about it. They can't believe it. Well, some of them don't even believe the Holocaust happened. You know, it hasn't been an issue with them, but then you can almost imagine what kind of people they are.
I had and I'm one of those 40 group that I wasn't taught it in history class.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure, you never.
I wasn't a good history student either.
Well, you weren't aware of it. You know,
Well,
it should have been made aware of.
Exactly.
Particularly when what happened was unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional and inhumane.
Yeah.
And unfair on top of all that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was at a presentation and there was a teacher there, and I had been talking about this, and I said, it's one of the people I'd interviewed had gone back to where the camp was that he was at, and it didn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And in the town, they didn't talk about it. They just wanted to pretend that the camp had never been there. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to this history teacher, and I said, it's kind of like with the Holocaust, like you said, where a lot of people either want to say, in Germany, you want to say, didn't happen, it's all, and she said, and this teacher got all mad at me. She said, it's nothing like that. Nobody was killed. And that was her whole justification of it. Mm-hmm. And I just was aghast at this lady.
Well, see, even the local history books that were put together by certain individuals left out the ethnic groups. And I'm not just talking about Japanese groups. There's the Native Americans and the Filipinos that were actually a part of Bainbridge Island history. And that part was stricken from the books. I mean, the people who wrote the book didn't even think about, well, those people are just, they're different, so they don't need to be in the history books. And that truly has happened, even in they had to publish the grade school text on history because those people were left out, those ethnic groups were left out. So, see, and I remember, I'm not going to even hint to who it was, but anyway, I remember talking to a certain individual who was part of the writers of our history, Kitsap County history, and we questioned her as far as why these groups of people were not there. And she just simply said, well, they're Japanese, they don't belong in the American history.
And this was a person of knowledge.
Yeah, she was a school teacher, sure. And bless her heart, she's gone now, but she even went to our church.
And we've kind of touched on this, but could it happen again?
Of course it is. It already has happened. So, I mean, not to the point that we were sent to camps, but I mean, how would you like to be a Muslim in an airport and become singled out for security, just because you look like one? You're singled out. I mean, that's happened. I mean, it's happened many times. You get walked down the streets in New York and you look like a Muslim or Iranian or something and get beat up. Or people throwing, objects at them. That's happened. Now, it hasn't happened constitutionally, but it could.
That's why I think part of it is so important that this does get back in the history book.
That's right.
Because without knowledge,
That's right.
there was a class project years ago, and it got out of hand back in the Midwest, and the kids said, "Oh, Hitler and all of that could have never happened. How could it?" So the teacher ran this experiment and started assigning people different roles. It got way out of hand, but within a week, he had shown exactly how it could happen. And this was even having told the students what happened, and so this dynamic of whatever. I never thought about that, but now that I run pictures in my head and listen to, and you didn't go to one of the camps, so you didn't see this part of it, but when I heard people describe the camps, they described, I mean, they were godforsaken country. I mean, it was like a desert, and they threw some shit. Is this any different than what was done with the Native Americans with reservations? I mean, wasn't this?
Well, the white people were trying to take the culture away from the Indians or Native Americans. I mean, they sent them to boarding school and told they weren't supposed to speak their native language anymore. You know, they had to wear uniforms outside of their native culture clothing. You know, and when you stop and think about it, how can you take culture away from somebody, you know? I mean, it's just like saying, well, you can't eat sushi anymore. You know? I mean, that's ridiculous. You don't even talk about sushi because that's not in our American culture. You know, well, stupid. But they're taking away, they're not be able to speak their native language or native clothes or even talk about their customs and their legacies and their histories. And I think one of the wonderments of, I mean, I think you like food, don't you? Well, I think one of the wonderful things that we do nowadays is we can go to the restaurant and we can eat something different than a hamburger or a steak or potatoes. I mean, we can go to Mexican, Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, Italian, whatever, you know? Well, I mean, how boring it would be without the ability to absorb somebody else's culture, even to the extent of cooking, you know? I mean, I think that's the magical that we could do this in the United States and in a free country and enjoy all the different cultures and the customs, and I think all these things should be encouraged instead of discouraged.
I think some of it becomes the fear of, well, I think two things. I think it becomes the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And then I also, in the fear of difference.
Yeah.
You know, because they've never seen it, so all of a sudden they, you look at how things were picked apart. When your dad came back, the store was still, had been run by some good.
Yeah.
So for your dad and your mom, once they got back to Bainbridge, a whole new struggle, or were they starting one step up rather than ground zero, starting all over?
Yeah, well, actually, the grocery store was released to somebody else, and so my dad only had the acreage and the farm to live off of. He didn't run the grocery store anymore. In fact, what happened was my uncle and father split the partnership because of the devastation of their project during the war, and we got the west side of the road and they got the east side of the road, east side of the road. So they got their portion was where the grocery store was. So we had to rely on farming, and we raised produce and things in the greenhouse, and it was a difficult period for our family.
So he did almost have to start over then?
Yes, he did.
Wow. Now, I heard a story, I don't know if I heard it accurate or not, but somebody told me there had been some stone lions.
Yes,
And they disappeared.
Yeah, well, they're steel lions, yeah, they're cast iron lions, yeah. They disappeared during the war and then they came back mysteriously.
How many years, long time after the war, or?
8 years ago. 8 or 9 years ago, yeah.
Because that's, I heard there was the good and the bad, that there were some people that helped out a lot, and then there were other people that thought, well, everybody's left, they're never coming back, and they just took advantage of whatever was there.
Well, the lions were, we don't know where they originated from, but there was a pair of them in the sunken gardens. In fact, if you look at that film real closely, you'll see them. But anyway, they're more of a symbol, you know, because they were part of the sunken gardens. And so they had disappeared, of course, during the war, and all of a sudden, like I say, 8 or 9 years ago, they reappeared again. One of them reappeared again. And I think there was some mysterious reason why they appeared, that first one. But we made light of the fact that the lions have finally come back in the local newspaper, and all of a sudden the second one showed up the next day. And the fellow told me, he said, well, gee, I've had that thing in my garage for how many years, and I never know where it came from. So now they're back, both of them are back together.
Have you rebuilt the sunken gardens?
No, we can't because it's wetlands.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, times change, I guess.
Yeah.
What do you think, or is there, for the people you and I'll never meet, generations to come, is there a message that you feel from your personal point of view that should be left for them from this incident, from the evacuation, from what they did?
Well, I've talked to kids groups. You know, I've talked to once in a while I have an opportunity to talk to youngsters who are not only interested in gardening but in ethnic history or culture. You know, I've taught bonsai classes, and I've talked to them about exactly the same thing that I'm talking to you about. You know, what's happened during the war. But my biggest point is that I think that a lot of them, for instance, I talked to this Jewish group of kids, and I said, you know, you're maligned a lot, you know, as a group, but I said, you know, if you're a good citizen, you should be damn proud of who you are, you know, no matter what they say, you know. And when I was a kid, I used to be ashamed of what I was. And strangely enough, basically because we wanted to be as white as we could be, because we lived in a white culture, and everybody said, well, gee, that guy's different. He uses chopsticks to eat. You know, he's really different because his eyes slant, you know, and that type of thing. Well, I feel that if you're a good citizen, you should be and you are helpful to the community, and that you should be damn proud of what you are. And I think one of the things we do is we try to teach people our culture, and it enriches them and enriches us. So I think those 2 points are very adamant in my mind as to what we should do to help our community. You know? So we do sponsor some community events like the mochi pounding and the sukiyaki dinners and et cetera, and we have native dancings and the drums and you know, all those types of events. And some people say, well, that might be kind of ridiculous, but it isn't. It's just expanding our community to the knowledge of our culture. And I encourage that for other groups too. I mean, I enjoy seeing Native dancing, Native American dancing, and gosh, we always get a kick out of this Scottish bagpipes and, you know, all those types of things. I mean, without this blend of culture, it'd be rather dull. I think our lives would be rather dull. And I think we need to be enriched by these activities, and we should promote them. And, I think that should be our primary goal, is to teach and respect other cultures.
Have you ever been to Japan?
I haven't been in Japan since 1939.
Ah.
You know, actually, you know, strangely enough, my first wish is not to go to Japan, but to other countries. Because I already know somewhat about our culture. I'd rather know more about other cultures. We went to China, and we went to Costa Rica, and we have some other things on the agenda, but it's not Japan. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'll get you tied down, so I get you
Yeah.
unmiked there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and